Let's start with Russian offensive in Kharkov. Putin is saying that they're trying to make a buffer zone in the northern part of Ukraine. And at the same time, we know that this was a response from what has been going on for quite some time, that they were attacking the civilian areas in Belgrade. But beyond that, do you think, is Kharkov a strategic area for Russia?
You know, it's interesting the way that the Russian president has phrased this, because what he is outline is an operational objective. That is to push Ukrainians back from the border with Russia so that the Ukrainian artillery systems can't reach Russian cities, Belgorod. This is something that the Russians have been warning about for some time now. They have said that this is what will happen if Ukraine continues to attack, Russian cities. But there's more to what's going on in Kharkov than meets the eye. First of all, when we're talking about some of the ranges that are involved, the buffer zone will take you right to the city of Kharkov. So even though it's not a stated objective, we're going to capture the city of Kharkov, it becomes an implied objective based upon the operational parameters of the Russian operation as defined. But it's also the timing of this attack. It's timed to coincide with a moment of maximum pressure being put on the Ukrainian armed forces along the eastern line of contact, stretching from Ukrainian territory in the north down through Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson. The Ukrainians have reached sort of this culminating point of manpower and material depletion. They've run out of men, they've run out of equipment, they have no strategic reserves left. So at this moment of maximum stress on the Ukrainian army, Russia opens a new front in a place where Ukraine wasn't prepared, despite the fact that Ukraine had been saying that they're going to prepare, defensive lines that are better than the ones that the Russians built in Zaporizhia that defeated the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Ukraine's going to have their own triple layer of defense. There is no defense, and the Russians are coming through. And again, the Russian attack is designed to not just acquire territory, of course, the buffer zone, but to continue the war of attrition, to deplete Ukrainian resources. And they're doing that on a grand scale. Ukraine had to take troops away from the eastern line of contact in critical fronts, including Chasiv Yar, which the Ukrainians are desperate to hold at all costs. They had to take units away from that, send it up north. And these aren't just any units. These are the best units Ukraine has, the mobile reserves, where they're being destroyed. So the Russians are also viewing what's going on in Kharkov as, part and parcel of their spring and summer offensive. They're shaping the battlefield. I can pretty much guarantee you that the Kharkov offensive is not the main direction of the spring and summer offensive of the Russians. That has yet to be revealed. And it may not be revealed until 2 or 3 additional offenses later. Russia has hundreds of thousands of troops that have not been committed to this battle, strategic reserves. Russia will open up another front shortly, I believe, in a place where Ukraine is ill-prepared to receive it, forcing Ukrainians to strip their forces even thinner. And then Russia will open up another front and another front. And the last front will probably be the strategic direction that many people are looking for. Some are speculating that it will be through Mykolaiv into Odessa and on to Transnistria. The coup de grace, so to speak, of Ukraine. So, is it in Is it in Russia's interest to launch that attack right now? No. Odessa and Nikolaev are well defended. The Kherson region is well defended. But if you continue to stretch the Ukrainian resources thin by launching attacks that threaten important regions, Kharkov, Sumy is a place that can be threatened, a breakthrough in the Zaporizhia area. All of these require Ukraine to divert resources or strip other fronts away. And since the Odessa front is relatively quiet right now, one can expect that the brigades that are there would be sent to plug the gaps up there, thereby creating a vulnerability that Russia is prepared to exploit. So I think this is part of a larger chess game that Russia's playing that will unfold in its totality this summer. The Russians have been loath to put dates and link dates to their operations. They've always been objective driven as opposed to calendar driven. But many Russian military officers, political figures, analysts, all have said the same thing in regards to what's going on now, that the month of May will be a decisive month in terms of major transformations in the map of the war, and that they don't expect Ukraine to survive the year, that they fully anticipate that this war will be over this year, and that the Ukrainian forces could be defeated as early as the end of this summer.
Do you think if they attack Nikolaev and Odessa, are we going to have some sort of different strategy on the part of the United States?
Well, I don't know what else the United States can do. We're not going to deploy troops. We're not going to deploy aircraft. We can do what Tony Blinken is suggesting, which is to authorize the Ukrainians to use American-provided weapons to strike targets in the Russian strategic depth. But all that does is guarantee that Russia will target Ukrainian decision-making centers and Ukrainian leadership, and perhaps even, depending on how the expansion of the conflict unfolds, target NATO decision-making centers in Romania and Poland and elsewhere, bringing about the direct conflict between Russia and NATO that the United States has always said it doesn't want to fight, and frankly speaking, it's not prepared to fight. So I don't expect any dramatic moves by NATO. They simply don't have the resources to follow through. It would be a gesture, a futile gesture that would only result in a lot of dead NATO troops. So, and the other thing too is, if the Russians attacked Odessa direction today, while the Ukrainians still have some viability, at least perceived viability in terms of the state of their nation. When you do your risk reward analysis, some people would say, look, we can still save Ukraine if we intervene now. But if Russia holds off on the Odessa operation until the very end, when Ukraine is in total collapse, when there's nothing to save, everything's finished, anybody who's talking about intervening to do what? To save what? If you are in a car accident and your body's thrown through the windshield and you're laying on the ground, broken and battered, but still alive, it's worth my effort to stop and attempt CPR, to stop the bleeding, to see if I can save your life. But if you're in a car accident and the car's on fire and you're stuck in the driver's seat burning, and I pull you out, no, it's not worth it. You're dead. And so Russia, I think, is going to wait until Ukraine's dead, so that the risk reward calculations that would be done by NATO in regard to any potential intervention strategy would come out overwhelmingly on the risk side and very little or no reward whatsoever, and it would help prevent an escalation of the conflict. So I think that's what the Russians are probably, the direction they're probably headed.
Yeah. There is an interview with a Ukrainian National Guard commander with CNN in which he says that how he praises professionalism of Russian forces near Kharkov. And at the same time, we are hearing that France is training Ukrainians to fight. And do you think that France has anything to offer them? Because it seems that they have been in this war for 2 years and they had a lot of experience in this war. But how much France can contribute to Ukrainian army?
You know, I'll answer the question this way. The United States Marine Corps sends training missions abroad. So does the U.S. Army. We train foreign forces. The special forces, the U.S. Special Forces, go in and they train skill sets. They train people on how to use weaponry, on certain tactics. They adapt it to the reality. So they tried to come up with a skill set that matches the needs of the client. The Marine Corps has a different approach. We bring a culture of a warrior spirit. So our training isn't just about teaching a skill set, but about imbuing the people we're training with a warrior ethic, a warrior spirit, a mentality, an approach to war. We trained the Georgian army prior to 2008. The Marine Corps was involved. Now, the Georgian army was too small and had insufficient firepower, but the Russians who fought the Marine Corps trained units all said the same thing. They said those are some of the finest light infantrymen we've ever faced. They operate professionally, they have good tactics, but they also are aggressive. Their way they approach the battlefield is very aggressive and things like that. If you have the time, you can change a culture, but it takes time. It took the Marine Corps years of working with the Georgian army and only a segment of the Georgian army to transform the mentality away from maybe Soviet style thinking or thinking that was crafted during the period of the Georgian civil conflict in the early 1990s to purge the Georgian mindset of that way of thinking to bring in this new way of thinking. It took a lot of time. So now here come the French to the Ukrainians. Ukrainians have already said they need a very specific skill set, one that is adapted to the reality of the battlefield that they're facing. They've been very critical of some of the training that's been provided by NATO trainers, including the British. British paratroopers, they're not bad soldiers, but they're trying to teach a skill set. It's a skill set focused training that is a skill set that is derived from the paratroopers' own experience in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's not related to the reality of the battlefield that the Ukrainians. For instance, the British and even American trainers put a lot of emphasis on patrolling. Patrolling is a very important skill in especially low intensity conflict. It's how you assert control over a region. It's how you collect information. It's how you project power through patrolling. It's a very specific skill set. The United States and the British have a patrolling package that's trained. The Marine Corps has it. We've adapted it from the Ranger patrolling package, which is a very sound thing. But if you try to do classic patrolling on the Ukrainian battlefield, you'll just die, because the new FPV saturation of these suicide drones is such that as you are patrolling, the drone will detect you and kill you. One of the things about patrolling is to collect intelligence and information. Well, you don't need to physically put a platoon or a company out on a patrol when you can do that with a drone right now. So the skill sets that have been transferred to the patrolling package is an intensive package that takes a lot of time. And so what happens is the Ukrainians were receiving this training that's of absolutely no use to them on the battlefield. Now, they were trained in some trench clearing operations, but again, that's not how it's done. You don't clear trenches by, bringing in a squad or a fire team and assaulting through the trench. You are prepping the trench with drones. As you come in, you have a drone operator there throwing an FPV drone up there, flying it in, and boom, hitting it. That's your fire support. Now, the drones are the fire support plan. The enemy has drones coming at you, so you can't be concentrated. You have to scatter. This is why when you see the videos, you're looking at, 5 men, 8 men. They're not flooding the zone. I mean, in my, when I was in the Marine Corps, if I were assaulting a trench line like that, I'd be coming at you with, a reinforced platoon. I'd have a base of fire. I'd have, one unit fixing, trying to envelop here, and I'd have Marines bringing firepower in. In this warfare, all my Marines would die because they're too close together. The FPV drones are going to hit them, suppress them. Artillery is going to come down instantly available. It's all blended in. You have to have not just the drones, you have to have your fire support people. So the moment the Ukrainians fire artillery on you, you have counter battery fire going in to suppress that, because if you allow the Ukrainians to continue to fire, they're going to kill you all. Completely different war than what the West is doing. France doesn't have this skill set. France is teaching the old way. Now, you could do the old way if France had time, because their trainers come from the French Foreign Legion. They have a culture of violence, a culture of warrior spirit that is, from their opinion, second to none. I will tell you, Marines who have gone and trained with the French Foreign Legion are very impressed with the warrior spirit of the French Foreign Legion. But it takes a long time to impart that. The French trainers are not going to impart the French Foreign Legion warrior spirit on the Ukrainians. There's not enough time. And the skill set that they're trying to transfer to the Ukrainians is insufficient to the reality of the battlefield. So the French will have no impact whatsoever on the Ukrainians. In fact, they'll probably hurt the Ukrainians more than they'll help them, because they're teaching bad. It's like anything, if you've ever taken martial arts or boxing, there's the right way to do something and there's the wrong way. And the wrong way to do it usually sets you up for somebody taking you down, because you're not positioned right. You're not applying the right sequence of moves. But it's muscle memory. So if you're taught the wrong way and it becomes part of your muscle memory, you're screwed. Your muscle memory has to teach you how to do it the right way, so that when you're under stress, your body automatically responds the way it's supposed to respond. If you're being taught a skill set that requires repetition of action, you're teaching muscle memory to a skill set that's going to get you killed. So much of the NATO training that's going into the Ukrainians is going to get the Ukrainians killed. It's not helping them. It's a waste of time. Ukrainians would be better off forming their own training academies based upon the lessons learned on the battlefield, get their own trainers in and train the skill set necessary to the Ukrainian soldiers so they can survive and function effectively on the battlefield. To rely on NATO to do this job for you is a death sentence.
You talk about the French army. How about the German and the army of the United Kingdom? Do they have any sort of skills that it's outstanding, in your opinion, as you've mentioned about the French army?
Well, I mean, the British, have a lot of tradition. Tradition is very important. But again, it's not assumed. It's there. It's imbued in everything. British paratroopers are very hard troops. They're very strong. They're very solid soldiers. But it's their tradition. I will tell you that British paratroopers put on the Ukrainian battlefield will all die. I will tell you that American Marines put on the battlefield will suffer heavy casualties before we adapt. We're not ready for this. We aren't trained for this. We're not prepared for this. It doesn't matter how good you are. The first time you run into an extraordinarily lethal situation that you don't understand, because in order for me to survive on the battlefield, I have to have a counter for everything you hit me with. First of all, my job is actually to get out there and make you react to me, which means I have to have a fundamental understanding of what you're doing. I have to have sufficient tool sets so that I can take control of the decision-making cycle so that I can act, make you react, know how you predict your reaction. So I'm responding to that. You respond, and I'm taking control of the situation through firepower maneuver until I am in a superior position and you either surrender, retreat, or die. That's what happens on a modern battlefield. I have to be totally familiar with my environment to make instant decisions. Marines are going to go into this fight not knowing what to expect. They're going to get hit with something and not understand the consequences of that, what that means, how it's setting them up. They're going to react in the wrong way, further exposing themselves to additional things coming in they don't understand. And so what's going to happen is a whole bunch of Marines are going to die. Now, hopefully there's smart people in the back sitting there looking at it going, oh, no, I see what's happening. Okay, pull back. Now let's do it this way. You're not going to get it right. You're going to get hit, lose more cash, but eventually you adapt. You know who's very good at that? The Russian army. The Russian army is the best in the world of adapting to the reality of the battlefield. They make a lot of mistakes, just like everybody. But when they make that mistake, they take their losses, they pull back, they immediately assess and retrain. They have an instant feedback cycle that gets their troops pulled out, retrained, sent back in, and they move on. The Russians are very good at that. The Germans are just a joke. There's no military spirit, elan in Germany. They got a couple good units, but they model themselves off of others. It's not their own traditions. It's they say, we are trained like Navy SEALs. We are trained like American Green Berets. Well, what about being trained like, Germans? But the German army, for the most part, is a barracks army. It's an army that's become accustomed to peacetime living, where they view it as a 9-to-5 job. You go to work in the morning and you sort of do what you do. You don't want to get too sweaty because you got to look good in uniform. You got to go home and be at your kid's soccer game. And so let's physical fitness. No, I'd rather eat sausages and drink beer. And so the German army is a very soft army, a very out of shape army. I can guarantee you that I could take a German infantry battalion right now, put 100 pounds on their back, force march them 25 miles, and they wouldn't make it to the end as a cohesive unit. They lack that skill set. They lack the endurance. They lack the combat mentality. It's a peacetime military. It's also a military that, much of NATO, has become addicted to technology. They like things that go whiz and buzz and wow, and it looks great and it works wonderful in a peacetime environment. The second it gets out in the cold, the mud, where there's no maintenance, the things break and it all bogs down. And the Germans don't have this logistical ability, the skill set to keep that functioning in a combat environment because they don't train in a combat environment. The Russians have been the Ukrainians and the Russians have been in war for 2 years. Their units have been in the field. They've mastered these things. Now, what Germany and everybody else should be doing is putting advisors right in the front there, not to teach the Ukrainians, but to learn from the Ukrainians. I would be sending guys in there, dress them up as Ukrainians, and say, your job is to live for 3 months. And I want you to take notes of everything you're seeing there, how they're doing this. Then I'm pulling you back here, and you're going to work with people to capture what you've done in writing so that we can start, adapting to all this. That's what the Germans should be doing. They should be having units in the front, not to pretend that we can teach the Ukrainians anything, but to learn from the Ukrainians. The Russians will never say anything bad about the combat capability of the Ukrainians. They will condemn the Nazis. They'll speak ill of the leadership. But I have yet to meet a Russian soldier, officer, or general who will tell you that the Ukrainians can't fight. What they'll tell you is Ukrainians are Russians. And they're the same people. We're fighting ourselves. The Ukrainians are very brave. They adapt. They're courageous. They're tenacious. The West should be learning from them. We should also be learning from the Russians. We should be doing everything we can instead of trying to come up with politicized talking points to put the Russians down. Sit there and say, wow, that was innovative. How did they do that? What's going on here? Instead of, I see so many, I'm going to really irritate a lot of people by saying this, but I don't care. America today our military culture has been taken over by special operations types because the Iraq war, the war on terror, Afghanistan was dominated by the special operations community. So we got a whole bunch of SEALs out there. We got a whole bunch of Delta Force guys. We got a whole bunch of Green Berets out there who spent their time in Nangarhar province dropping the mother of all bombs on ISIS caves. And they think that they're God gift to the world because they were big and bad and wonderful, and they had beards and they have tattoos and they have muscles and all this kind of stuff. They don't know anything about modern warfare. They know about low intensity conflict, but they know nothing about modern warfare. And these guys have a tendency to look at what's happening on the battlefield and say, we'd never do it that way. Well, no kidding. You never did it. You never did what's going on here. Well, I would never do that. You never did it. It's not part of your skill set. Your job was never to come up with a armored supported assault on a heavily entrenched defensive position. Your job was always to go out and kick down the doors of defenseless Iraqi villagers, gun down unarmed men, terrorize the women and children, snatch some people and leave, or to sit back in the hills and call in an airstrike on an Afghan wedding party and reclassify it as a Taliban gathering. That's what you did for a living. You never engaged in the kind of sustained combat. The heroes of Abbottabad, SEAL Team 6, Red Team, they went in and they got a 57-year-old diabetic. Hey, bravo, you idiots. They trained in an air-conditioned environment. They lifted weights. They ate food. They got a good night's sleep until the moment came when, after they got perfect intelligence from drones, electronic warfare, they got on helicopters and did something they already rehearsed a million times. They went in and they still screwed up. The helicopter pilot went in and didn't predict what would happen when the fence line wasn't the way they built it when the CIA put together the model and they practiced on one type of fence. They came in, the lift wasn't the same. They dropped, they crashed. I thought you guys were the best in the world. No, they make mistakes like everybody else. But my point is, that was an operation that's been, everybody says the SEALs are the best in the world. Well, anybody can be the best in the world if all you do is lift weights, take steroids, train, air condition, sleep, eat, and then get perfect intelligence and go launch an operation. How about sitting in the mud? You know who were the perfect soldiers? The infantrymen of World War II. The guys sitting in the foxhole, dirty, filthy, hungry. Everything was wet and cold and miserable, and they functioned. They weren't sexy like the SEALs. When they took off their shirt, you didn't see ripped muscles, go, oh my God, look, that SEAL's got the perfect six-pack. That's not what you saw. When they took off their shirt, it was pasty. They had boils. They had sores. Their muscles were not well-defined. They were hard because they lived a hard life, but their bodies weren't impressive. They were pathetic specimens of human beings, probably a little too scrawny, but perfect warriors because they survived in horrific conditions. Marines, we pride ourselves on being physically fit, but the perfect Marine warrior was the Marine going through the island hopping, the guy who had dengue fever. Had diarrhea, uncontrolled diarrhea, was puking his guts out, didn't have any sleep, skin was yellow, had malaria, had the shakes, his uniform hadn't been changed in 3 months. His ass was hanging out because he doesn't have any underwear and his pants are ripped off. Everything's ripped off over there, but he had a helmet, he had enough gear on, he had a rifle and a bayonet, and he couldn't be stopped because that sick, pathetic, skinny, scrawny dude was a warrior. A warrior, the same kind we had in Vietnam, the guys who went to the jungle all the time. Not the sexy special operations guy, not John Wayne and the Green Berets, the guys that were in the jungle all the time, the Army, the Marines. Those are the warriors. And those are the guys who have done it, who can sit there and tell you, yeah, no, that I see what he's doing here, that's smart. Not these special forces types, because they don't understand it. They're sitting there today commenting on things they just don't understand. And yet Americans are going, well, he was in the Ranger Battalion, or he was in the Ranger Regiment. Who cares? Well, he was a Delta Force operative. Who cares? He was on SEAL Team 6. Who cares? Wrong skill set, different war. Shouldn't listen to them. Should listen to people that have appropriate skills. I said early on in this conflict, if you haven't done a schedule of fire of 2 artillery battalions or greater, then don't go on TV and talk about this conflict. Because if your scope of conflict involves a JTAC, joint tactical air controller sitting there with all of his radios calling in satellite guided bombs against a target that doesn't have any air defense, you're in the wrong war. You're talking about the wrong thing. And that's the problem with Americans today. Now we have generals who only know those wars, or if they're old enough, they were back in the Cold War. General Hodges, you see him all the time. What does he know? He doesn't know anything about the fighting that's taking place right now. Nothing about that. His brain was programmed for a different war, a different time, and shaped by, what he experienced in the Iraq conflict and the Afghan conflict. We don't have any Americans right now that are capable of speaking intelligently about the war that's taking place between the Russians and the Ukrainians. None whatsoever. And we should. We used to have these things called foreign area officers. Now they have them today. You see them all the time. I'm a foreign area officer with a Eurasian specialty. That's the new way of saying Russia, because we don't want to highlight Russia. It's Eurasian specialty, Eastern European and Eurasian specialty. But they're experts of nothing, of nothing. First of all, they're not Russian expert. You're not allowed to be a Russian expert anymore. So they become an expert in Hungary. They become an expert in the Czech Republic. They become an expert in Germany and Kosovo. But they're not Russian experts. We used to have guys who were Soviet experts. The Soviet foreign area officer was a true specialty. Somebody who could speak the language, knew the culture, studied the tactics, studied the culture, would come together, and his whole purpose was to basically be the Russian on the staff of the officer that he was assigned to. His job was to think like a Russian. And when they'd say, well, what the Russians do, he'd say, oh, this is what the Russians would do. And how would he know? Well, A, he studied them. B, he talked to them. His job was to go out to his Russian counterpart and talk with them, learn from them. Now, the Russian was doing the same thing, learning from him about America. That's the way the game works. I have been to the Russian embassy a couple of times. People mock me because I tend to go there on, Defender of the Fatherland Day, and I hang out with a bunch of Russian colonels. And I talk to them. What do I talk about? Well, we're all military guys. We talk about military things. And they sit there, and it's not top secret, but I'm getting an idea, a feel for them. I talk to them. I have a drink with them. We bond. We talk. I am, at my advanced age today, and the fact that I've been separated, I'm a better qualified Soviet or Russian foreign area officer than any Russian foreign area officer out there today in the U.S. military. Why? Because I have more relevant conversations with Russian military counterparts. The U.S. guys don't talk to them. The Russians were saying, we try to, we reach out. They're not allowed to talk to us. If you ain't talking to the Russians, you ain't learning about the Russians from the Russians, so you know nothing about the Russians, and that's why we get it all wrong. Big pro hint to the United States Department of Defense. Unleash your foreign area officers. Let them start talking to their Russian counterparts. You may learn a couple things, and you may empower yourself with knowledge and information so that you realize that what you're trying to accomplish on the battlefield ain't going to be accomplished. And maybe the Russians aren't the threat you think they are. Once you talk to them and you learn from them, you're no longer afraid of them. So fear isn't what's driving you. Knowledge is. That would be my advice. A little less time focused on trying to shove outdated tactics on the battlefield, and more time talking with your Russian counterparts and learning from them about what's really going on.
Scott, I want to talk about the conflict in Ukraine, but since you talk about the German army, I'm so curious what has happened to German army. This was the Nazi Germany was fighting the entire world. And right now, the picture that you're giving us from the German army, it's so pathetic. Why we cannot see the same tradition from Nazi Germany coming down to Germany today?
Thank God we don't. We don't want to see that. We don't want to see a militarized Germany. That's the last thing we want in the world. I'm happy that the German army is a bunch of fat, pretzel-eating, beer-chugging, no-good softies. That's the way I want them, because that's all they need. Who threatens Germany today? Who threatens Germany today? Is Luxembourg going to take the 150 men that it has in its one company of infantry and send them across the border to conquer? Nope. Are the Dutch going to finally wake up and say, screw it, we're taking over, northern Germany? Are the Danes going to say, let's become Vikings again and move down and conquer Germany? Are the Austrians going to say, we're tired of this Germany dominating Austria. It's time for Austria to dominate Germany. Poland, no, Poles know better than to mess with the Germans. They hopefully have learned that lesson a couple of times. But the French don't want to mess with the Germans. The Italians, nobody wants to mess with the Germans because there's no reason to. There's no reason to. If you're going to interact with Germany today, it should be economically. That's where Germany has this reputation of this modern industrial state that has well-trained workforce, puts out extremely well-made equipment, high efficiency. Or at least that's the reputation it used to have until they allowed America to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. Their economy is tanked, deindustrializing as we speak, and they're getting worse and worse and worse. So how does Germany compensate? By saying, well, we're going to militarize. The irony here, and I think you're setting me up. I'm sensing that you're asking this question because you want a specific answer. And I will probably go ahead and give you the answer you're looking for, but I know what you're up to here, you little innocent question asker, you. Right now, the German government, they call themselves Greens, or they call themselves social liberals, and they have all these terms that they use that disguise what they really are. They're Nazis. There you, Scott, you said it. That's what you were looking for, and now I'm going to give it to you. They think like Nazis. At the end of the day, when confronted with a problem set that requires Germany to stand up and define who they are, what defines them, what motivates them, it comes back to, if we're going to reindustrialize, it has to be done through a militarized angle. Militarization, industrialization, unification. You've just created the trifecta of what can help turn Germany into the modern incarnation of the Third Reich, the Fourth Reich now. The fact that the Germans aren't disgusted by the notion of having German equipment sent to Ukraine to kill Russians, if they haven't figured out that that is not just a bad look, it's a disgusting look. It's a look that Germany can't embrace. But this is what we have here. Now, the problem with the German leadership, though, is that, the German military is not there yet. And the other problem they have is that they're trying to make something out of materials that, let me put it this way. In World War II, the United States, we built battleships, nice big battleships, the Missouri, the New Jersey. When we put the Iowa, we put them into, we mothballed them after the Vietnam War. And then later on in the 80s, we said, man, let's get the battleships back out there because we want the big guns. And so we brought them out, but they've been sitting around, some rust here and there. And so we got to make some changes to them. We got to repair this, repair that. And the Navy went, well, this is a very unique kind of steel that we have here. We don't make it anymore. Not only do we not make this steel anymore, we don't have the people that know how to make it anymore. They're all like dead and retired. This is in the 1980s. We had to go out, the US government had to go out and find sailors who had been on the New Jersey before and sign contracts with them. They couldn't bring them back because they were too old. But we also had to go out and find steel workers and chemists and people that were in their 70s and say, hey, how did you do it? And they had to go get their old notes. They go, down my basement, I've got my wait, my teeth just fell out. I've got my notes on the formulas that I had. And we had to take all these old guys in and sort of retrain ourselves to do this. And even then we couldn't do it. We lacked the ability because we weren't focused on doing that. to become the Nazi army, for the Wehrmacht to become this powerhouse. Remember, they had their, first of all, they weren't that far removed from the First World War. So you had millions of Germans who had fought in a war, understood war. They were not generationally removed from conflict. So as a nation, Germany was still populated by people that knew war, fought in the war, and could be brought back to fight again. Second of all, they had created this 100,000 strong professional fighting force. All it did was train, and it trained with the mindset of expanding. So it was a very top heavy fighting force, so that you had a lot of officer and NCO cadres that could be broken out and then beefed up with new recruited troops, newly formed troops. So it was built for expansion to go to war. And they were working on their tactics. A lot of people don't know that the Germans were in Russia, actually, working with the Russians on combined armed tactics, working with the Russians about tank operations, about aircraft, flying, learning how to do basic blitzkrieg 101 was being done by that, in concert with Marshal Tukhachevsky, who was one of the great geniuses of the Soviet army. Such a genius that Stalin ended up putting him in the gulag and killing him because he viewed him as a threat. But Tukhachevsky was working with the Germans to do this. So when the Germans made the decision that they were going to violate the Treaty of Versailles and the restrictions and expand their military, the military that they built was ready for war, was with a mindset for war, prepared for war because they had been trained. The German army used to be a pretty decent army. Let's never forget that the West German military was led by Nazis when it was recreated, literally led by Nazis. Senior NATO leadership, Nazis. Now, eventually Nazis get old, they die out, and they're replaced by people who aren't Nazis, but they might as well be, because they never learned that being a Nazi was bad. All they saw was, well, my commanding general was a Nazi. And when we'd get drunk in the bar afterwards, he'd tell great stories about the battles on the Eastern Front, or how they fought the Americans, or what that. And so they stayed on. West Germany believed that it was a frontline state because it was a frontline state in the Cold War. And their army was trained to think like a frontline state. In fact, it was a very aggressive military because the West Germans didn't like the American-driven concept of trading land for time, and using nuclear weapons to slow down the Soviet advance. The Germans are going, you guys do know that when you use that nuclear weapon on a map, you're dropping it on German soil, and that soil now will be unusable for the rest of our lives. You're ruining, destroying it. We refuse to do that. We want a forward defense. So the Germans are actually saying, we're going to defend every inch of our land. We don't want nuclear weapons used. We're going to, and so they trained for that. That was their mentality. When German youth joined the military, they put the German flag, the West German flag, on their shoulder, and they were damn proud of that flag. They were proud of being a German. They were proud of being a part of NATO. They recognized the front, that they were leading from the front. Then the Cold War ended, and all of that went away. And the Germans suddenly believed in peace. First thing that happened is they got this East German army full of East German patriots. They told the East Germans, you can't join our army. Y'all have to go away. We'll pension some of you. Most are just going to be unemployed. They picked a handful of people that would transition over. I worked with a couple of them, because they knew about Scud missiles. So they kept a couple of these guys in to teach everybody else about Scud missiles. But vast majority, none of the leadership, none of the officers, and almost all of the enlisted were sent away. So the post-Cold War Bundeswehr is a West German army, not a combined army. So the mentality still is all West German, and it stopped being about how to, because there's no more forward defense doctrine. There's no doctrine. There's no war. There's no enemy. The Russians are gone. Everybody's gone. So the Germans just sort of stopped doing anything. They stopped maintaining their aircraft. If you take a look at the operational availability of their nuclear capable Tornado aircraft, it's very low percentage. I remember as a weapons inspector in Iraq, we used German CH-53s as our primary heavy lift transport. and the discussions that would be had in the German Air Force about how they can get enough operational CH-53s in there, because most of them didn't have the spare parts. They weren't spending the money on that. They didn't maintain them. They were hangar queens. They stopped doing anything. They stopped training because training is very expensive. People don't understand that. To train right is very expensive. And to train right, it has to be live fire training. I mean, if you're running around with blanks or you're going up on computer screens thinking that that teaches you something, it teaches you nothing. Bad habits. Remember, we talked about muscle memory. If you train people with bad habits by sloppy training in combat, they're going to fall back on a skill set they learned in front of a damn computer screen. They're going to fall back on a skill set they learned firing blanks. Bad skill set, you die. Because you make a mistake in front of a computer screen, you just reset it. That's the computer game mentality. Oh, God, I died. It's like World of Warcraft. We wiped on that raid. Well, if it was a real game, you'd all be dead. It's over. You lost your subscription, and it's done. You have to start all over. But no, we wiped on that raid. Reset it. Let's go and do it again. Well, when you wipe on a raid in real life, you're just dead. You're just dead. So you have to train realistic all the time. And it's hard. Training is hard. I was in 29 Palms for 2.5 years, and I spent easily 70% of my time in the field. I was married. My wife never saw me. This is peacetime Marine Corps. Peacetime Marine Corps. Might as well have been wartime, because all we did is train. And we weren't training, we were preparing for training. Realistic, day after day, warrior mindset. It's expensive. It costs a lot of money. When the Cold War ended, the first thing the United States said is, we need a peace dividend. We need a peace dividend. Now, you can't take your peace dividend away from the defense industrialists. They still got to make their money. They got to pay off their shareholders. You take your peace dividend from the frontline troops. You cut their training. You say, well, we don't need to train like that. We will do other things, Oh, well, let's train them about, sexual harassment prevention, transgendered rights, whatever. Train them about anything but closing with the destroying the enemy through firepower maneuver. That's the mindset. The Germans became the same thing. They became a barracks military, a 9-to-5 military with no mission, no focus. And as a result, they are incapable of doing anything. The embarrassment, the ultimate embarrassment, was when the Germans provided this Cora computer gaming software in support of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And the Germans went to Grafenwohr and they sat down with the Ukrainians, and they'd open up the core thing and they'd lay out the maps. And they said, this is how you're going to attack, and we're going to computer game this thing. And the Ukrainians are all like, you want us to do what? You go here. Well, shouldn't we be learning how to drive the Bradley before you or start drawing arrows on the map? Shouldn't we know how to drive it? Don't worry, you'll get to drive. Okay. But as you drive forward, I see on that little computer thing, it says that there will be air power available to us. Over here is this little click. When you click it, it brings in the close air support, but you're not clicking the close air support button. Oh no, you don't have close air support. But if we don't have close air support, how can you make this line move on the computer? How does that happen? Well, we've taken away the enemy threat. But how do you take them away if you don't have close air support to take away? Well, we're just assuming they're going to run away. I mean, these are the Germans sitting there just making shit up. Excuse my language, making stuff up, drawing map, because they don't know anything about war. They've spent their entire life playing stupid computer games. That's their training. And they fake it to make it. If you can't get it done, just program the computer to get it done for you. And that's the reality of the German military today. They can't fight. The biggest joke right now is that the Germans have told, I believe, the Lithuanians, or maybe the Estonians, I think it's the Lithuanians, one of the Baltic countries, that they're going to reinforce their component, which is a reinforced battalion right now, to a brigade. You're going to get 4,000 Germans. Now, normally that would scare the living crap out of you, especially if you're a Baltic state. You'd say, wait a minute, the last time I had 4,000 Germans, they wore swastikas. Oh, yeah, but so did we. That's right. I forgot the Baltics were all Nazis anyways, Nazi sympathizers. So maybe they all decide to get together and kill whatever Jews are left in the Baltics. Who knows? That's what Germans and the Balts can do. But the Germans are going to send this brigade in there, but not today, because they're not ready. They have to, here's an interesting, they have to recruit the soldiers specifically for this assignment because it's outside of Germany. And so they have to go. They can't just take a battalion. It's not like the American military says, hey, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines, you're going to goddamn Lithuania. Pack your shit, move. Yes, sir. Can't do that. The Germans are like, hey, the 263rd Mechanized Battalion, you're going to Lithuania. No, we're not. Why? Constitutionally, we can't deploy outside of the country without the permission of Parliament. This is a voluntary mission, and you need to recruit new soldiers. And we're going to go eat schnitzel and drink beer. So they're not even guaranteed they're going to get this brigade there. And when they do, they have to re-recruit, retrain 2 battalions to join the 1 battalion they have that are already there. And they don't even know if they can do that. They don't even know now if they can get the equipment, because all their equipment, these are barracks guys, all of their equipment that they're supposed to have, they don't have anymore. They either sent it to Ukraine, it doesn't function, or they borrow it from other units for their training exercise. So these guys are sitting there going, yeah, we need new stuff. Hey, Schultz, hey, Hitler, thank you for answering. That militarization thing you want to do, build some new infantry fighting vehicles for the battalion. Oh, you can't. Why not? Oh, the steel plant shut down because they can't afford the gas, the energy prices. Why? Because America blew up Nord Stream. Yeah, you're a fucking genius. I mean, the Germans are such a pathetic country right now, so pathetic in everything they do. It's a joke. I'm enjoying watching them flip around on the ground like the fat, pathetic turds they are, trying to get this brigade over there. And you expect the Germans to do anything to help the Ukrainians? You know what the best thing Germany could do to help the Ukrainians? Dig up the grave of Stepan Bandera, burn his body, grind it up into dust, mix it with cow shit, and spread it all over the fucking planet so nobody could ever again visit this man's grave, eliminate his memory. That's the best thing they could do for the Ukrainian people, is to get rid of Stepan Bandera. But instead, they allow the gravesite to stay there, and they make the Ukrainians believe that somehow Germany is going to provide what? To save the day. There ain't no German cavalry. First of all, if there was a German cavalry, all the horses would die when those fat fucks jumped in the saddle and tried to ride their way to Ukraine. Germany can't fight today. Germany has zero combat capability, none whatsoever. Their military cannot survive on the modern battlefield, and they know it. That's the only good thing here, is that the actual leaders of combat units, or units that are supposed to be combat units, know they can't do the job. Now, they just need to tell Admiral Bauer that. He's the loudmouth up there at the head of the military commission of NATO, who keeps talking as if NATO can fight hook and jab with the Russians. At least General Christopher Cavoli, the head of the American forces, while he's spinning politically, he has come out and he said, look, just so everybody knows, the Russians right now, they have a very big army backed by a very efficient defense industrial base, and they are combat hardened. They're probably the biggest, baddest military on the planet today. At least somebody understands what's going on here.
One of the companies in Germany, Rheinmetall, they're talking about producing arms on Ukrainian soil. Do you think, what would be the reaction on the part of Russians if they do that?
I don't know. Answer the question yourself. What do you think the Russians are going to do? That's okay. I tell you what, guys, show us the blueprints, where you're going to lay it out, and we'll make sure that we leave you alone. Do you guys have any special logistical support requirements? Or you're going to have to bring in material from Germany to build this up? Let us know the schedule of arrival so that we don't bomb the bridges that day. And you go ahead and build it all up and get it all doing, and put some child care facilities in there, because we want everybody to be happy, and we'll never touch it. Or the Russians are going to say, all right, show me the photograph. How much money do you think they sunk in that foundation so far? $1 billion? Let them keep building it. Okay, where are they at now? 2 billion? Yeah. Have they put any equipment in there? No, wait. Oh, look, they just brought in the specialized heavy machinery, the computer numerically controlled machines. How much is that worth? A couple billion? Blow it off the fucking map right now. Boom, 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 boom. And that's it. which is why it'll never happen, because no insurer will ever insure that German business. It's fantasy. No investor, where are they going to get the money? You think the German government's going to go, all right, let's sell some bonds. Let's sell some bonds. Hey, buy the bond of the German factory that's going to get blown up 3.5 months after it begins pouring concrete. Buy the bond. Nobody will buy that bond. Nobody will invest in that. This is just stupidity in the extreme. Maybe he'll get, maybe he's looking to get, $100 million so he can keep some of his engineering teams together so they can waste their time drawing up designs of plants that'll never get built. But they're never going to put that factory in Ukraine. It will never happen.
Yeah. The Zelensky's term came to an end, and it seems that he's continuing under the martial law. And at the same time, we're hearing that Poroshenko, the former president of Ukraine, he's not happy with the situation in Ukraine. Do we know what's going on right now in Ukraine, considering these political parties inside Ukraine?
I'm sure we know. I mean, it's difficult to get precise information because there is no free press in Ukraine. That's one of the byproducts of a dictatorial regime under martial law is they suppress the press. So it's not like we have a viable political opposition in there that's allowed to call out the government for its many failures. Ukraine says we are a wartime government under wartime conditions, and so we have to do that which we need to do to survive. So they've eliminated political opposition. They've eliminated the free press. They've eliminated elections. So let's stop talking about democracy and just understand what Ukraine is. And it's been for some time now. It's a military dictatorship. It's martial law where a civilian president rules, backed by not a constitution or the rule of law, but by muscle of the Ukrainian security services, a police state, the Ministry of Interior, etc. That's the reality of it. Now, you can make a case from the Ukrainian perspective that this is necessary. In fact, I would, to be honest, I would make the case that it's necessary. Democracy is ugly. Democracy is inefficient. Democracy creates fractures in society, especially in hotly contested times, that can be exploited by your opponents. That the greatest weakness the Ukraine could put forward to the Russians would be to have a viable political opposition that the Russians therefore could then support and create deeper fractures within Ukraine. That from a Ukrainian perspective, in war, you need unity of command, unity of leadership, unity of focus, and that if you can't support a democracy, can't support the elections the way they needed to be supported as they would be supported in peacetime, then you take that off the map and just focus on winning the war. The problem is the man that's the dictator. He's not up to the task. He's first of all, you'd want your dictator to be honest. You'd want your dictator to be somebody who could not be corrupted, either by power or by money. A man who cares about Ukraine, a man who cares about the future of Ukraine, a man who cares about Ukrainian democracy, who always keeps in the back of his mind that at some point in time this war will end. And when this war ends, I am going to step aside and I am going to treat. Because once you become dictator, you can never be president. You can never be president. You can't go back to being president because muscle memory. You've learned too many bad habits. And those bad habits are okay during war where you need the singularity of focus to win the war, to get defense production up, to make the cuts necessary, to mobilize when necessary. But you should be singularly focused on winning the war. Zelensky is singularly focused on sustaining corruption. It's all about corruption. Everything he does that talks about winning the war has a corruption aspect to it. It's about getting more resources, knowing that a certain significant percentage of those resources are going to be skimmed off by the top by the political and economic elite to enrich themselves. It's the way Ukraine works. Zelensky is the first to take off from the top. So, he is the worst possible person for this job. He is not a politician. He's a comedian. He was brought in as a figurehead. And so people use him to enrich themselves. The people below him aren't singularly focused on winning this war. They're singularly focused on making money. And when you build a team with that as their principal focus, they don't want to populate their subordinate ranks with guys who are going to do the job, because honest people will look at the corruption and say, pow, shoot them, move up and say, no, we got to cure this thing. So the entire edifice is corrupt. There are no honest people in Ukraine. None. Every single one of them is on the grift. They're all liars. They sustain this lie. Some of them may be decent enough not to make fortunes themselves, but they understand that should they speak out, should they squeak, should they squawk, they will be crushed. And so they are complicit. It's like I've said in America that once an American police officer is on the job for more than 6 months, he's already corrupted. How can you say that? Well, because in that 6 months, I can virtually guarantee that he's seen another cop do something that violates the law, and he was silent about it. That makes him a corrupt cop, because a corrupt cop can tolerate no infraction of the law by a fellow police officer, none whatsoever. And the moment you do, you've bought into the corruption. So Ukraine may have people who aren't taking the money, but they are aware of those who are taking the money, and they are silent. They cover up for them. They are corrupt. The entire system is corrupt, and it cannot be redeemed. There is no hope for this. Again, if you had a hard man, an iron man, a dictator, you could even call him a brutal dictator who truly loved his country and was truly doing this to help his country get through this conflict, with the understanding that he and his system will exit stage right when this is done, you could tolerate this kind of stuff. But not the corruption, but you could tolerate, no free press, no that. But this fake democracy we have in place, Zelensky is no Winston Churchill, never has been, never will be. But the West continues to promote that. But at some point in time, the emperor has no clothes, and Zelensky is as naked as can be. And the West can't keep pretending that he is outfitted in this remarkable outfit. He's naked for the world to see. He has to be removed. And who's going to replace him, though? Poroshenko? He's even more corrupt. He is the epitome of corruption. If you remember when Zelensky before he became president, he did this TV show, Servant of the People. And in it, he's supposed to be the great anti-corruption crusader that's going against the corrupt system. Who do you think the corrupt system was? Poroshenko. It was literally, the TV show was about, this wonderful little school teacher turned, populist president taking on Petro Poroshenko. It was a scheme designed to insinuate Zelensky as a believable presidential figure to fight the corruption of Petro Poroshenko, of the oligarchs, of the corrupt government officials. It was done on purpose to put that in the mindset of the Ukrainian people, so that when the time came to confront Poroshenko at the polls, Zelensky could say, I would like to be the guy I play on TV. I would like to be the anti-corruption crusader. I would like to be the man of peace. Now, he was just a comedian playing a part, but the people didn't know any better. Martin Sheen, there was a period of time where Martin Sheen could have run for the president of the United States. I would imagine if he was younger right now and West Wing wasn't so long ago, that Martin Sheen could be the president of the United States today. Does he have any qualification to be president? None whatsoever, except one. He played an American president on a popular TV show, and many Americans, when they see them, say, that's the president of the United States. I believe that man could be the president of the United States. That's what they did to Zelensky. They put him up there. But the corruption that he was fighting in his TV show is the corruption of Petro Poroshenko. So Poroshenko is no alternative. There is no other alternative. You can go back and look for other people and previously, but they're all tainted by Ukrainian nationalism. The Ukrainians that came into power after the Orange Revolution were all ultra-nationalists. The first act that Yushchenko did was to elevate Stepan Bandera to the national hero of Ukraine. You want them in power? Ukraine has no viable option. The best political option for the Ukrainians actually are the Eastern Ukrainians who fled when this conflict began. They are in Russia today. They have formed a government in exile. To the extent to which the Russian government actually, listens and absorbs what they have to say, I don't know. I can't say that, but these are the people. I've talked to several of them, and it's interesting. They say that when this war is over, they believe that Russia will be in control, political control of the totality of Ukraine, and that there will be a purge of all of the Western Ukrainian-based nationalists and all of the corrupt oligarchs, etc. And the purge could take 3 to 5 years. But when it's done, the Russians will actually turn the system over to the Ukrainians and say, you elect your own officials, have a presidential election, elect somebody. And maybe at that time, the Ukrainian people will be able to elect somebody who isn't an ultranationalist or a corrupt oligarch or beholden to a corrupt oligarch or threatened by Ukrainian nationalists, to elect a real leader, a servant of the people who can actually build genuine democratic institutions in Ukraine.
Yeah, you already know what has happened to Afghanistan. At the end of the day, the United States left it in the hand of Taliban. And right now, in Ukraine, I think the future of Ukraine would be together with Russia, not with the United States, because the United States doesn't belong to that region. And Russia would be interested to have a prosperous Ukraine on his border, because it's so important for Russia as well. That's why it seems that Putin didn't decide to destroy everything on the western part of Ukraine.
It's interesting. I talked to, again, some of these Ukrainian politicians in exile, and I asked them, I said, many in Russia consider Kharkov and Odessa to be Russian cities, Dnipropetrovsk to be a Russian city, Mykolaiv, Sumy, all of these to be Russian cities, and that they believe that this war can't end until Russia takes over the totality of the territory that historically has been known as Novaya Russia, New Russia. And these are Ukrainians. They are, some of them are ethnic Russians, some aren't. But almost to a person, they went, well, that's not necessarily the model that is going to happen. And I went, really? How do you explain this to the Russian people who think that it has to happen? Understand that Putin right now is continues to only talk about consolidation of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk. He wants all of those territories to be, evicted of Ukrainian forces, and those are part of Russia. But there's no talk right now of Odessa, Kharkov, Sumy, Dnipropetrovsk becoming part of Russia. None whatsoever. There could be. But here's the thing. When this war is over, what does Russia want? Do they want a Ukraine that hasn't been totally defeated, continues to believe in NATO and EU as the direction they need to have, where ultranationalism continues to reside? That kind of Ukraine will just be a cancerous tumor attached to Russia that is going to cause problems down the road. You haven't cured the disease. You may have caused it to go into remission, but it hasn't been cured. I don't think there's anybody in Russia that will tolerate that outcome, not after the sacrifices Russia has made. So the tumor must be removed. Now you can do this by cutting Ukraine apart in a way that destroys its viability as a modern nation state. But when you do that, understand that the cancer cells, these ultranationalists, they're going to go into diaspora. They're going to come in, they're going to go down to Elliman, New York, where there's already a Banderist base. They're going to go up to Canada, where Cynthia Freeland has all of her Nazis in place. They'll go to Australia, they'll go to Germany, they'll go into diaspora, where the intelligence services of the United States and Western Europe will provide them money to funnel resources back into Ukraine to keep the nationalism alive. And because you've created a Ukraine that's not a viable state, there will be unemployment, there will be poverty, there will be political unrest. And so the nationalist ideology, cancer cells, can take root and begin to metastasize. And once again, you have the tumor. That's not an option either. The Ukraine that needs to exist has to be a viable nation state. It has to possess access to the sea, and it has to possess a viable industrial base that hasn't been destroyed. People say, why aren't the Russians taking everything out? Because at some point in time, there will be a Ukraine, a post-conflict Ukraine, and it has to be able to survive without a back-breaking investment of resources to rebuild it. One of the best ways to get Ukraine to revive is through self-revival. That means that Kharkov, Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa need to be working for Ukraine. Now, how can you do that if Ukraine is becoming a cancerous tumor again? You can't. You can't allow this industrial capacity to empower the cancerous tumor. So you eliminate the tumor, you have the industry now become viable and creates wealth and prosperity so that Ukraine is healthy. There is no diseased tissue that the cancer cells can attach to. All the CAA money is bouncing off because there's not a desire for it. This requires Ukraine to be whole, functional. But it also requires, in order for safety, that Ukraine to be connected to Russia, not the West. And the thing that these politicians told me is that the solution is a union, such as exists between Belarus and Russia, a political, economic, military union. And that the solution is to have a Ukraine, a viable Ukraine, that is in political, economic, and social military union with Russia and Belarus. An independent state, but an independent state whose future is only connected to Russia. There's no path to the EU, there's no path to NATO, only to Russia, because only by integrating the industrial base of Ukraine into this economic union can Russia allow that industrial base to exist outside of its sovereign control. Russia can't allow this industrial base to exist to sustain a cancerous tumor. It can only do it to revive a Ukraine that's part of a Russian-Belarus union that is promoting. And some people would say, well, that's just a return to the Soviet Union. Yeah, but the Soviet Union wasn't a member of BRICS. The Soviet Union wasn't a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You see, the Ukraine that would be in union with Russia would have connectivity through Russia to the global economy. It wouldn't be this this singularity that's attached to this larger dominant state. It would be part of a team process of engaging with the world, where its industry not only revitalized its own society, but strengthened Russia, strengthened Belarus, strengthened the world. A whole different approach. And I think that's the direction that the Russians are heading in right now. Again, this is purely an assessment on my part. I know you probably have a lot of people who watch this show who go, bullshit, Ritter doesn't know what he's talking about. Maybe I don't. I've been studying Russia for a long time. I've been talking to a lot of people, and that scenario seems to be, in the long term, the one that provides the best range of options for a positive outcome. For the people that promote taking Kharkov, taking Odessa, taking Dnipropetrovsk, those are short-term outcomes. But how do you prevent the cancer from coming back? Because the moment the cancer comes back, you're just going to be doing this all over again. If you promote the destruction of Ukraine, who's going to pay for it? And again, by destroying Ukraine, you create the disease of poverty, of social collapse, political disengagement, disenfranchisement, that allows cancer cells to come in and create the tumor all over again. You got to keep the Banderas out. You can eradicate the Banderas inside Ukraine, but they exist everywhere. They exist right down here by my house. And you cannot give the West the chance to reinfect Ukraine with the cancer of ultranationalism, of Banderism. And the only way you do that is to bring in all of your appropriate, I don't want to use the term vaccine because people will say, you're a pro-vaccine person, but you need to create the conditions where you have a healthy Ukraine that can fight off the cancer cells. And the healthiest Ukraine is a united Ukraine with a viable economic base that has a mission that doesn't promote the resurgence of nationalism, but promotes stronger ties with Russia, Belarus, and the global South.
Yeah. Considering the summit in Switzerland, they want to talk about Ukraine. At the same time, we've learned that Lula from Brazil, the head of South Africa, they're not going to be there because they don't believe that is any outcome coming out of this summit. And we still don't know if China would participate in this summit. But how do you think when it comes to these type of summits on the part of the United States and European Union, is all PR for them, or why they're doing this?
It's a self-licking ice cream cone. It's just there to please themselves. How can you have a peace summit to talk about bringing an end to the conflict in Ukraine and not invite the Russians? So it's a joke. It's a 100% joke. If you allow Zelensky to come to the table and promote the Zelensky formula, which the Russians have said doesn't stand a snowball's chance in hell of ever becoming reality, even the West understands that, then this is literally an exercise in futility. If China comes, understand China will come after President Xi and Putin met, where Putin said, look, I support the Chinese initiative for peace. But the Chinese themselves are looking at saying, well, but we got to have Russia at the table. We can't be doing this. So, even if the Chinese participate, it won't be because they're snubbing Russia. It'll be because Russia gave them not permission, but Russia said, okay, we're not opposed to this, but the Chinese will come with certain expectations that aren't going to be met by this conference. Therefore, this conference will never succeed. And the other thing about the Chinese is they're not big fans of futile gestures. If the Chinese sit down at the table, they are sort of hoping there will be an outcome. They're not there to play guesswork or to make people feel good. They're there to achieve a result. So I don't see the Chinese coming to this peace summit unless they have done the preparatory work where they have people saying that we've bought on to the Chinese peace deal. But the Americans will never let that happen. The Americans will never let a peace conference occur that actually achieves a genuine peace. And I just want to remind everybody that the American strategic objective towards Russia is the strategic defeat of Russia, and the Ukrainian conflict is designed to promote that defeat by weakening Russia, both militarily through a drawn-out conflict and by continuing to justify economic sanctions designed to strangle the Russian economy. The combined effort of a strangled economy and an endless conflict are supposed to demoralize the Russian population, so they rise up in a Maidan-type event, the Moscow Maidan, to evict Vladimir Putin from power. That is the strategic objective of the United States, and you can never forget that when you talk about anything the United States does vis-a-vis Ukraine, Russia, or Europe. They're not there. The United States does not exist to come up with an equitable outcome, a peace outcome, a stabilizing outcome. The United States policy is to destabilize Russia, and it needs this conflict to do that. So the United States is not somebody you really want involved in this process because they're not interested in true peace.
How did you find Xi's visit to Europe? And after that, we had Putin's visit to China. But before Putin's visit, we had these new tariffs from United States on China, and just increasing from 25% to 100% on China. It was a tremendous gift, I think, to Putin going to China right before that. And when you put these pictures together, what's your understanding? And we saw something so strange that we haven't seen before, just Xi embracing Putin. I talked with Ambassador Chas Freeman. He said that it means a lot when it comes to international relationships between these two countries.
Well, I mean, first of all, we need to never forget that Putin and Xi have known each other for a long time, and they actually have a very strong relationship based upon genuine friendship. Now, it's very dangerous for nations to allow the national interest to be driven by the personal friendship of their senior leaders, because the senior leaders are there to promote the interests of their respective nations, and you never want to have the potential of the interest of the nation being subordinated by issues of friendship. But we're talking not about children here. We're talking about two of the most experienced leaders in the world, leaders of major nations, the leaders who deal with issues on of a magnitude that other leaders that we tend to when we say, well, the Sunak, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, what has he done? But no, we're able to sit there and say, well, he's the Prime Minister of Great Britain. He's a great leader. No, he's not. Macron's been around for a little while, but he's the French leader. It's France. I don't even think they're going to pull off the Olympics. I'm very concerned about a rat-infested, bug-infested Paris. Putin has rebuilt Russia. He spent a quarter of a century taking Russia from the brink of the abyss into this powerhouse nation that it is today. Xi has overseen radical transformation of Chinese society. And again, in a way that the West hasn't picked up. I don't know how many people in the West know that not once, not twice, 3 times, Xi has implemented a 5-year plan designed to bring 300 million people out of poverty into the middle class. The population of the United States is just a little bit more than 300 million. 3 times Xi oversaw programs that brought the equivalent of the American population in totality out of poverty into the middle class 3 times. And China today is a nation transformed. We don't understand it. We don't understand anything about it. So we make bad assumptions and bad calculations. Russia understands it very well. Russia's been working with China. They've witnessed this. They've seen this. Russia and China are in harmony with one another right now. It was a little bit dysfunctional. If you took a look at their band that they were trying to put together in 2021, the guitarist was a little out of step with the drummer, who was thinking he was playing jazz. He was supposed to be playing a rock beat, and the bassist was off doing something we don't know. They were up there, they were trying, but it hurt the ears. After 2 years of war, everybody's singing from the same sheet of music. They're all practiced, rehearsed. Why? Because they've both come to recognize that the threat set that Russia faces in Ukraine is the same threat set that China faces in Taiwan. And that if China allows Russia to be bullied or defeated, then that same threat set will now come and bully and try to defeat China. That the best defense for China is what Russia's doing in Ukraine. To hold the wolves at bay in Europe so the wolves don't become empowered in the Pacific. The other thing is, when you speak of this transformation to a multilateral world, it's done economically, not militarily. And, China needs Russia. Everybody talks about China's, manufacturing potential. First of all, Russia's no slouch. Again, we tend to ignore Russia. I always advise people to go to Russia. That's why I go to Russia, to learn. The Prime Minister of Russia just he just attended a digitalization summit or forum in Nizhny Novgorod, a city to the east of Moscow, where he talked about how Russia is going to be transitioning to the digital era. He, in the city of Sarov, they've built a laser institute. It's one of the top laser institutes in the world to incorporate digitization and laser technology into the manufacturing sphere. As part of the sanctions thing, Russia has empowered its own software developers, and they have some of the finest software developers in the world. Everybody talks about Russian hackers. That. Oh, the Russian hackers. Well, what is a software developer? A hacker who's doing things legally. Same mindset, same skill set, people who know how to do computer coding and things of that nature. The Russians have really good people, and they've built their own software industry. And so they've pushed Microsoft and Apple and all the other Western software makers out. And Russia has its own, and Russia now is working with China. Here's the beauty of it. You see, China isn't just the Chinese economy. China is the gateway to the global economy. So Russia, working with China, is getting its products out to the world, expanding its economic reach. It's sort of a big deal. The West just doesn't understand it. We don't understand anything about Russia. We don't understand anything about China. I don't understand anything about China, to be honest. I've read about it. I have a whole library of books that I'm reading about it. But, I think in order to understand China, you got to go to China. You got to see it for yourself, and you got to talk to Chinese and have them show you what's going on, because we still have a lot of prejudice and bias built into whatever analytical models that we bring to bear. Even people like myself who are progressive in their thinking about China, there's a lot of built-in bias, a lot of filters, a lot of assumptions being made because of my ignorance about China. A lot of the books I read are 20 years old, 10 years old. And you can't be reading a 20-year-old and 10-year-old book except for historical relevance. If you want to know about China, you got to be reading the book that came out today, because they are making advances. We tried to strangle China with chips, the computer chips. They're made in Taiwan, and we wanted to keep that technology. So again, I'm not a chip guy. I hope everybody understands I'm just a Marine. Okay. I have a very specific skill set, and computer technology is not it. But I think I understand that there's things called chips. I got that part, computer chips, transistor, whatever, but they're made. One of the ways you make them is through a technique called lithography, I believe, and that has something to do with printing. And so you will print silicone chips that are embedded with certain things, and there's different ways of measuring the efficiency of a chip. And I can't remember if the higher number is good or the lower number good. I don't know. But there's a good number, there's a bad number. The Chinese were able to do a medium number, and we wanted to prevent them from doing the high number. So we unplugged them. We said they couldn't have access to this lithography technology that comes from, I believe, the Netherlands, which is available in Taiwan. Cut them off, strangle their thing. We want everything to collapse. But you can't do that of a nation that of 1.4 billion people, because that nation has the ability to go, who are our best chip people? Well, we got a whole bunch of them. Many of them trained in America and Europe, by the way. They go to those universities and they put them together and say, unfuck this problem. And all those little Chinese chip whiz kids sit there and they unfuck the problem quickly.